Next on our agenda this evening is a workshop session which is open to the public. And this workshop session is regarding the Mississippi Dunes Master Plan. And we are staying in here. I don't know if that was known or not. Usually we do workshops in the conference room, but we thought it would be good to have this televised, but also be able to provide feedback to the public, whether they're in the audience or on TV. And kind of to kick us off here is our City Administrator, Jennifer Levitt, to kind of walk us through this. Thank you.
Well, Mayor, members of the council, it is exciting because I don't usually get to stand on this side of the podium. It's been a long time. But here's the thing. Mississippi Dunes and the whole master planning effort has a lot of history with it and a lot of background. And I've been here with the city for 17 years, so I thought, well, why not let me give you some of the background and some of the big picture. Because a lot of times when we look at master planning, sometimes we get too finitely focused on one thing, and we may lose sight of the big picture and all of the other things that have transpired. So I also have some other friends with me today to talk with you about some of the other details, and you'll hear from them as we go along in the presentation, because this I want to make sure that we are showing that how open and transparent we are. We're giving the residents an opportunity that are maybe in the audience and at home to truly understand the process and to understand all the elements that go into the master plan. So when we actually look at the master plan, the slide starts in 2020. But Mayor and Council, we know that conversation for master planning started way before then. The Council has had a strategic plan, and as part of that strategic plan, one of the missions has been to get river access. I loved what the resident said this evening because it aligns with your vision. You have said you want to bring river access to everyone. And that means everyone of every ability. That means that we need to have paved trails and handicap accessibility. You know, some of the images that we showed enable people to get to the river to view things. Because right now, you know, the SNA doesn't have hard paved trails. People don't get to experience that view. And so I really applaud the resident for mentioning that, because that has been the council's goal and vision, is to enable everyone to have river access. And as part of that, in 2020, the Parks Commission did approve the strategic plan of different properties that we could specifically target to enable to make that happen. And so that started in 2020 and was approved. What's interesting is, you'll remember this property, Mississippi Dunes, it was on the market for sale for a number of years, right? We met with a lot of different developers with a lot of different ideas. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But as part of that, the one landowner that went through the really arduous and lengthy process to clear the liens off the property, and to do that, he finally got the property clear and free last November. At that time, he came to the city and said, I would like to now start thinking about developing and how I want to develop, and I want to go out for a proposal, and I want to get a developer on board. And so at that point, we said, you know, we need to hire our own expert because it's in a transitional planning area. But we know that property is absolutely unique. I can't agree more with the residents when they indicate that. And what did we do? The first element we started with was the park. So the Parks Commission dove into looking at that master plan, and they looked at it in detail. I mean, because you remember that list of all the different elements that could be there. And they started to really whittle it down to what is the vision that's going to make this park and this water access unique. And so they continued to do that, you know, and then we brought some of those ideas to the City Council on May 19th. And the council, you said, you know, it's not big enough. We need more parkland. You said, let's strive for 20 to 40 acres of parkland. It needs to be bigger. So that means we go back to the drawing board with a consultant. And we did that. We started to explore how we could expand that area. We took tours of the Parks Commission and went out there and looked at the plans, and we actually walked it. And we said, this tree stand is going to be saved, and this dunes area and this prairie is saved. I mean, these are boots on the ground, looking at the plans, analyzing it. And that took place. And then in September, we fine-tuned that plan. And we said, okay, residents and public, we want your input. Now, we provided you the opportunity to do it on a social media platform on our website. It was on Facebook. But we also hosted an in-person open house. And Zach will talk a little bit more about that, as we had staff there from Parks and Rec to engineering to planning, so that everybody could get their questions answered and understand the master plan. And then from that, we actually walked with the Planning Commission because they're the ones who are going to touch this next. And we want them to understand what the situation is, understand the lay of the land, and have done that. And Council, I know you have already walked it many times and you're very familiar with this site. But that is all the different elements that have led us to tonight's discussion and conversation. And through this presentation, we'll also go over the next steps of that master plan. Now, it's interesting. I feel like I'm now John Burbank, so some of you that may know can laugh. I'm going to put on my John Burbank hat and go back in time. This is great because we see the aerial photo in 1937. You start to see where we actually have a farmstead that's up in the corner of 103rd and Gray Cloud Trail. And you can see that this area is really in an agricultural use in there, and it stays in that agricultural use in 47 and 57. It's interesting. Here's an interesting fact if you're ever doing Cottage Grove trivia. Yes, we did have an airstrip in 1970. It actually shows up here on the screen where I'm circling it. It was just a mode airstrip, so if you ever have a trivia question, you might find that interesting. And you can see actually in the 1990s on this slide, it was still had a little bit of agricultural use and other things were left there. And then Mississippi Dunes came to be. Doc Dobler came forward with a plan and got a conditional use permit, and he actually did mass site grading on pretty much the entire 160 acres that you see that turns into a golf course, and that was in the mid-90s. So is the area absolutely pristine and never been touched? No, I can tell you back to 1937, it has been farmed and it's been an agricultural use. And as part of the golf course, it was all mass site graded. But we're talking a little bit about history. Now, here's the thing. Yes, there is a house on the corner there that one of the residents has brought to our attention that maybe we should ensure that we do a little bit deeper dive into if there's any historical significance. Our initial findings have indicated it doesn't, but here's the thing. Let's dig deeper. I mean, we'll obviously go through the SHPO review as part of the EAW, and we'll cover that. But as you guys know, we've hired a specific specialist related to Cedarhurst. So we've asked the new history consultant to specifically dig in deeper to this property and to ensure that if there is a historical component, we will address it. And that will also be addressed in the EAW as well. So it is not something that a resident may bring to us and we've pushed it aside. The answer is no, we're going to dig deep into this. But I can also tell you that this house sits on a remnant parcel as part of the master plan and is not even being touched as part of our actions. See, now you're going back to my roots of a city engineer, and I might start talking some transportation lingo, so I'll apologize in advance for this. But I get excited about the Southwest Arterial study. I actually was part of the first one that was done in the early 2000s because the county said, you know, we're missing an actual arterial roadway in the southern part of the county, and we know that we need to be able to provide access in the east-west direction of our county. And so we actually met with all of the surrounding townships and cities and 3M, and then the county decided we need to update that study because Cottage Grove, you have a lot of growth. But here's another part of the trivia question. There is one other reason why they wanted to ensure this study was done, is because we need an arterial roadway to get to the island. The island is actually in the comprehensive plan as a park area. And in the 90s, there was a plan to make that a regional park. We know that eventually that will develop. You see it in our comp plan. You've communicated with aggregate industries because we know that their mining will not continue forever, and the Schillings have a desire to develop that property. So we absolutely needed an arterial roadway to come through there. Now, as part of this, the county actually approved this pretty much last year about this time. They spent 2 years engaging all of the residents along the corridor, all of the businesses, and all of the partners. And specifically, they engaged with the underlying landowner to ensure that this plan would match with their future development plans. And so you'll actually see that incorporated into the master's plan study. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the Washington County Regional Park Plan. Because yes, this was adopted in the 90s. Now, I will tell you, not everybody may agree what that study had said, but we know one thing for sure, it's going to be a regional park. And I can tell you, as a partner with Washington County and the underlying landowners, we've been working for the last 2 years to figure out what is our plan and to actually update that plan. So this isn't something that is sitting on the shelf. We have been actively working with our partners at Washington County and the underlying landowners. What is absolutely unique about this regional park is it's not just the interior island area. It actually involves all of these outer islands. This is something, when you talk about what is unique to Cottage Grove, this will be the unique element of a regional park. Now, I know back in the 1980s, you guys probably remember when there was a dialogue that maybe this should become a state park. Well, that's been set aside. We know through Met Council in Washington County, this will eventually be a regional park, and we are working to that end. But guess what? We need to ensure that if we're going to develop the island, we're going to have a comprehensive plan, which we're working to update, but we know we need roads, we know we need sewer, we know we need water, and we also probably know we're going to need a new bridge at some point as part of that. But this gives us an opportunity to expand our water trail and to expand the opportunity for an actual marina, a boat launch, because that will put you out in the navigational channel of the island or of the Mississippi River. Because back here in the backwaters, if anybody has been back there, you know it's got a lot of tree stumps that are under the water. It's not really where a boat of any size you're really going to take back in there, because we want to be able to expand our kayaking program. We have a great partnership with the National Park Service on that because we know we have some unique elements that we want to bring there. So that's really where we want to focus that larger park. So one other thing to mention is when we look at, say, the 3M settlement dollars, here's the thing. Council, I can remember writing some of you the memo in January of 2006 to tell you that there's this thing called PFCs, and they found it in our drinking water. And some of you know that we have been on a long journey, and that journey was part of the DNR and the PCA. They are the co-trustees of the money that was set aside for this. Now, the co-trustees have had number one priority, and that is drinking water. That has been to ensure that the 14 communities that have PFCs in their drinking water, they have a solution. That has been their number one priority. Their priority has not been priority number two, which a lot of folks want to talk about. And that was the damages to the environment, where they set aside $20 million. I can tell you today that the plan to get our conceptual drinking water for our city took 3 years. The city of Cottage Grove got $90 million to ensure that our water is safe and that we're going to have treated water. We even talked about the expansion of water main down to this area. But why do I bring this up? It's because the co-trustees' number one priority is drinking water. They will be setting aside a timeline and a process to utilize those damages to natural resources, that $20 million pot, but it's not going to be today. It's not going to be tomorrow because their focus has been on drinking water. So when different entities indicate that there's money available from the 3M settlement, it's going to be available, but it's not there today. Are we going to be a good candidate? Absolutely. And where should we focus that effort of acquisition? Here on the island. Because we're going to have probably 1,500 acres of open space. This is what some different entities want. They want open space. And I can tell you, as part of Aggregate Industries' annual mining permit, every year, what do we put in the permit? Restore the prairie and continue to establish the oak savanna. That's because we have been committed to the mission and vision that this will be the regional park in this area. This is where, when those funds become available in 2 to 5 years, this is where we're going to focus that effort of acquisition, because that's where you're going to see a substantial park. What we're talking about on Mississippi Dunes is more of a community park. It is not a large regional park. Well, since you guys got me talking, I'll continue to tell a little bit more stories about the site and the background. When we look at the site, let's just be real. There's a railroad track that runs through it. Right now, there's 37 trains that come on that track every day. Obviously, at 103rd Street, as you can see in the picture, the bridge is elevated. We've worked for a number of years, as you guys all know, to get quiet zones in our community. This is an above-grade crossing. It's an always stop condition, which is definitely not a positive, thing as we think about our entry, which is why our partner at Washington County, we're continuing to work on this corridor and work on options. We know the river doesn't have navigational ability. We also know the site has the MSP flyway over it. When we were out there with the Planning Commission, I think we had trains going by, we had planes going overhead, and we also know there's that existing home on there as well. And I've already given you a lot of background about the PFCs. But I will also tell you, related to the PFCs, we also don't want to see this necessarily develop with just large rural lots, because we know that there's already contamination in this area, and so we really need to hook them up to municipal water and not have individual wells. The other thing too is, if we actually think from an environmental standpoint, if we did those large estate planning, they're all going to have on-site septic systems. Where is the natural drainage going to flow? Is to the river. So we're actually more environmentally friendly by actually putting it in our sewage treatment plant and getting it treated versus having all of those septic systems on the site. Someone also referenced that this area floods. I just need to clear up the misnomer on this. When we actually look even at the 500-year flood elevation at 702, the highest, the typical house would be at like 730 feet in elevation, so you got nearly 28 feet. There's no flooding. Here's what's interesting. The only part that could get inundated with floodwaters is actually the land that the DNR is buying from the landowner. The DNR has actually reviewed this parcel in detail, and we said to them, what are the cultural resources you want to preserve? What is the most important? Let's mark them on a map and let's figure out how we can actually draw the parcel line. And guess what? The DNR said the only area we want is that 12.3 acres that you see on all of your master plans. Because they said that remnant prairie that we've been working on to restore and how we do our prairie burns is really important to us, and we would like access to that. So the DNR has not indicated they desire any additional acquisition of land. Now, earlier in the presentation, I told you we would go back to history a little bit more. So we all know Doc Dobler. He had come to the city when he said, well, I'm not sure if I want to continue with the golf course. Remember, he had visions of hotels and event centers, and he wanted to have the next big outdoor festival. So we had those conversations on the property. And then we had a lot of developers. I remember we sat in the St. Croix room, and we had developers come to us and say, well, maybe we need to have a campground with trailers, with hookup. Maybe we need greenhouses, some agricultural and some plantings. Maybe we could have a brew pub at the old building that was there. I mean, remember, the ideas were quite broad, right? So when the comprehensive plan came up for discussion, we all remembered all those brainstorming exercises, and nobody had a detailed or good plan because it was all brainstorming at the time. But we knew one thing. If we were going to do anything, it had to have a master plan to it. So that is why when you look at the comprehensive plan, it has that wonderful gray shading that talks about transitional planning, because we knew this was unique and we needed to take a deeper dive into the property to ensure that we develop it appropriately. So that's why we're actually here tonight, is because of that, to ensure that we put a plan together. Now, the master plan process, like I said, talked about parks, but we also need to talk about the underlying land use. So I'm going to have Emily talk about the land use, and then I'm going to have Zach talk about the park and open space, and then we'll dive a little bit more deeper into the environmental components of it. Because I got to tell you too, we had one resident that spoke, and he knew something about the environmental process. He knew that there are environmental thresholds, that if you have X amount of lots, you have to do an EAW, but if you keep the amount of lots below that, you don't have to do an EAW. And so he had challenged us as a city to ensure that we did an EAW. And that is exactly what we're doing. It doesn't matter what the lot count is, we are going to perform an EAW. So we're not short-circuiting, we're not cutting corners, and nobody is playing any games. We are actually going in directly to address those environmental issues. So that way there's open, transparent, and the ability for all these state agencies to comment. And so we'll get into more detail about that. So I'll turn it over to Emily to talk about land use.
Mayor, Council. So I'll talk a little bit more in depth. As you can see, and Jennifer mentioned that a master plan has two major components. In this particular instance, we focused on the park portion of the master plan, and we also focused on the land use portion of the master plan. So I think it's important as we look at our plan, given we are proposing two different types of densities, low density and medium density, what does that look like? What does that feel like? So when we think about low density, it's the 2 to 4 units per acre. Calarosa comes to mind, the Calarosa development on the north side of the community. Parkview Point on the east side of the community, and on the south side is very similar to like a Summers Landing development. And then when we start to look at medium density, what does that look like? What does that feel like? That's the 5 to 13 units per acre. You think about the Woodward Ponds development in Glacial Valley, that's over at Military and Keats on the east side. High Point is on the west side. And then I also want to mention Settlers Bluff on the south side of the community at 100th and Hadley. It might look a little bit different than a standard townhome development, but it is in fact medium density land use. So now that we've got a little bit of an idea of what land use and density looks and feels like, as you can see, the proposed master plan, or the land use portion of the master plan does propose a large portion to be low density, with a small portion on the eastern edge as medium density. And so I wanted to kind of talk through how do we come to that determination. I want to make very clear that we take a look at the entire area, the entire site. There are a lot of components that we look at and talk about before we come to such a determination. Some of those things include looking at the future alignment of 103rd Street, and how does that impact this particular site? How is that going to align? What does that access look like? And in this particular instance, it kind of comes in and creates a little bit of a node, for lack of a better way to put it. So how does that work with land use? We also looked at the railroad tracks, as Jennifer mentioned, of course, align the entire property. So what does that mean? So planning practice, of course, looks at creating a buffer from a potential single family or low density development, and that's why we kind of included that medium density to create just a little bit of a larger buffer. We also looked at the need for a second access for public safety purposes. So how does that shift things? What does that look like? How does that flow with a potential development? We also looked at access spacing. How does that fit along 103rd, and what does that look like as it flows through the development? So again, I want to make very clear that we look at a lot of different components when we work through a master planning process, and specifically looking at the city strategic master plan, wanting to create diverse neighborhoods, providing for diversity in housing types. So this is why you see the low density and the medium density in this particular instance. So with that, I will turn it over to Zach Doctor, and he is going to talk more in depth about the park portion of the master planning process.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Mayor and Council. So I love Jennifer's background in the history, but about 3 years ago, or 2.5, 3 years ago, we knew something was changing at the golf course. We saw that was something we needed to be aware of and address. And shortly after that fall, when the golf course was preparing to close, we had a strategic planning session with the council, and the council very clearly, once again, for the 20 years I've been here, improve access to the Mississippi River. So that was the challenge to me, and I took it to the Parks Commission. We said we need to develop a river access strategy report. So myself and the Parks Commission, we went back and forth and said, here's 12 to 14 sites on the river that have opportunity for public access someday. We prioritized those. We scored those on a matrix of 20 different items, whether it's utilities or ease of access. But the one that also jumped out was, kind of what was ripe for potential development. So Mississippi Dunes jumped out, and that became priority number one. So this process, this master planning process for parks is a little bit different than normal. Usually we master plan a park when we know we have the land. We didn't know we had the land, but we knew this was important enough of a piece of property that we wanted to get ahead of it. So we started the master planning process. It just so happens that this housing conversation kind of ended up coming alongside while we were doing the park master planning process. But I think it's important to understand that how important this piece of property was for the council and the commission and staff to identify as a future park, and that's why we jumped on this master planning process right away. So you guys have seen the master plan before. It's changed over time. I think when we first started, we had 20 acres, and that was identified as, what we heard from the council was, get the riverfront property. We took that, we got the riverfront property, we got the 20 acres that we knew was required by park dedication requirements, right? So we got what was the minimum amount required, and we started master planning that. And of course, we took the whole site into consideration as far as how it could be master planned. We worked with the commission on what those minimum requirements were. We threw a whole bunch of options at you for recreational amenities. Some of them I'm almost embarrassed of now because they threw mini golf courses and everything, but that was with intent, right? We wanted to throw everything at the commission and the council and say, what do you want to see here? And that's how we work, right? So we start with a big vision and we whittle our way down to what we think is right for the site. What we heard loud and clear from both the residents and from the council was it needs to be bigger. And that was the #1 priority when I went back and redid the master plan, was 20 acres wasn't enough. So we came back, and you have the plan you have before you today, which has 33 acres of riverfront property. It has the 12 acres that Jennifer had mentioned about the SNA expansion, which brings their site from 237 acres up to 249 acres. One of the comments I wanted to cover was, I've heard multiple times that, this is a park that's going to serve the neighborhood. That is not how we're designing this park. We are very specific with our intent, the way we design our parks. We have neighborhood parks, we have mini parks, and we have community parks. This is a community park. Jennifer did a good job of explaining how we're going to get people access to the river, which is something we're struggling with. We have a ton of shorefront property, but very little public access. This is an opportunity for public access on the Mississippi River, and we want to get people to the water's edge. Whether that's visually or dipping your toes in the water or putting a small boat in the water, we want to make sure that people have that opportunity. So you see on here things like a boat launch, a 4-season building that can be used for rentals or for educational purposes, a playground, but that's a small piece of that park, right? So the rest of that park is native habitat protection with trails going through it. One of the things, we've restored hundreds of acres in Cottage Grove to Prairie, and that's one of my passions, right? Protecting and preserving and restoring native habitat. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of grant applications, it takes a lot of different things. So, but we're proud of that. But one of the things we're really proud of to complement that is we get people access to it. You can go down the power line corridor, 100 acres of prairie. People can walk right up next to it. If they're on a wheelchair, if they're on, whatever it is, we can get them right next to it because we have paved trails that go through these sites. So a really unique opportunity. But what also is really cool is that you have the natural trails next to it, and it's going to connect to the DNR SNA property. So there's 249 acres of DNR SNA property that's pretty much untouched, right? Of course, they have to manage it too to make sure it stays grasslands. Grasslands that aren't managed turn into buckthorn forests and wild sumac and things like that. So everything is managed, but this is the plan before you. We heard you loud and clear. One of our goals is, or one of the things we're working on right now is that the land that we're master planning for, we've been working with all sorts of folks to make sure we carve out what we need. I think Jennifer did a really good job of explaining. Boy, I've walked this site a lot. It's little, like we need to cut out that little corner and protect that stand of trees. It's those little details that we're working through. So I want to make sure that that's not lost, that we're not just working, on a map. We're out there walking and making sure we're protecting the most precious pieces of that property. And also we're working with partners. So we have active conversations with the Minnesota DNR for habitat protection restoration. Obviously we talked about the scientific natural area expansion, and then land acquisition might be an opportunity. We've been talking with Washington County. The council passed a resolution that we want to have a discussion with Washington County about land acquisition through their legacy fundings. And then the complementary services with the regional park plan I think is extremely important. We don't want to duplicate whatever recreational opportunities we have here with what's going to be on the regional park, or what's in the SNA, or what's at Hayes and P. Moore Park. But we want to make sure that they complement each other, because there's going to be a water trail there. It's going to be really neat. People can go from Mississippi Dunes to Hayes and P. Moore Park, to the regional park, to Settlers Island someday, and that's going to be a water trail. That is a very unique feature. It's ways people can get on the river, but not necessarily in the main channel, and they'll feel a little bit more comfortable maybe paddling back there and things like that. So tremendous opportunity. And then obviously we work with the South Washington Watershed District like we always do on an enhanced stormwater protection plan, and then educational interpretive opportunities for the public. Jennifer did talk about the master plan public engagement. We worked really hard on that. We did an online engagement for in that neighborhood. We did an open house where we had that log out there and people could vote for what their most important, what they felt were the most important pieces of the puzzle for the master planning process at the Mississippi Dunes. I printed off every email correspondence I had included in that report. So I put all that information in a report. There's a table that shows the results of the log correspondence game. There's the emails that I've received. You guys, the council has received a lot of emails. I think everything I've had has been shared with the council and the commissioners. So we've had countless, I shouldn't say countless, we've presented each and every commission at some point or another. I think the ACHP, that one meeting was canceled, but we intend to meet with the Advisory Commission on Historic Preservation yet as well. But I know they've had the information in front of them to at least review it. So lots of correspondence, and that information will be included with every master plan review we have moving forward. So what I will say with the public engagement, it didn't change the master plan. We had a master plan draft in place. After the public engagement, the plan has not changed yet, because really the main direction from that from all the correspondence was less homes, more property, and those are the decisions the council is going to have to guide us on. So we haven't changed the master plan yet, but as the council's aware, it's still got to go through the commissions, the Parks Commission, Planning Commission, and then back to the council for final approval. So if the council decides to make changes there, we still have the opportunity to do that. And then I'll turn it back over to Jennifer.
Mayor, members of the council, I'm going to ask Angie Smith, she's with Bolton and Mink, she's going to come forward and just talk about the EAW process, because this will be a process that will be undertaken and the timelines associated with it and how that works. So we thought we'd just have her outline that for you, and that way there's a clear understanding, because there's some additional steps that come with that. I'm saying that more for the public's point of view, because I know council, we deal with EAWs and AUARs all the time, but that can be foreign lingo to those watching. So we'll step through the process now for that. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. Good evening, everyone. Angie Smith with Bolton and Mink, as mentioned. And I'm a senior environmental planner with the firm, and here to talk briefly about the process, so hopefully walk through that. It sounds like you all are pretty familiar with the alphabet soup of environmental review processes. So whether you're looking at EAWs, AUARs, or whatever the case might be, there's a wealth of information on the Environmental Quality Board website as well. I regularly carry around my nifty EAW guidelines, so I am not going to pretend I'm still in school and have to memorize everything. I like to reference back to the resources that exist. So for an EAW process, really what we're doing, what the goal of that environmental review looks like, is to go through and perform a comprehensive review of all the things that you've been hearing about tonight. So we're looking at historical site, what's been happening on the site over time. We're looking at the cultural resources side of things. We're looking at the natural resources side of things, whether it's threatened and endangered species, water resources, things along those lines. We're reviewing contaminated properties or hazardous materials. There's a list of 20 different sections within an EAW that we go through and really want to assess all of these different pieces of the puzzle to show that we're doing our due diligence and ensuring that that review process is comprehensive and really informs the process over time. So many of you may already be familiar, but Minnesota has a great Environmental Policy Act. It's very robust. My colleague and I, we work in other states than just Minnesota, and Minnesota really does have it laid out nicely. And it's easy to reference. You can go in and look at what those mandatory thresholds are for different development projects. And with this one, Whether it triggers a mandatory review or not, the city really is taking that step in making certain that this happens. So that's good for all of us, I think, for that review and making certain that we hit all those points. So some of the other pieces that come into play with an EAW process, that environmental review process, we're looking at that early coordination with some of our state agencies. So the State Historic Preservation Office, we're wanting to get initial early coordination with them to determine if we need to be doing any deeper dives on the cultural resources side of things. We're also reaching out to DNR and the Natural Heritage Information System, the NHIS information. So that's looking at your rare, threatened, endangered species and where we need to better inform the environmental review as we're looking through that. Additional elements come into play, so we're looking at geotechnical work. We're looking at contaminated or environmental site assessments, hazardous materials sides. We're looking at wetlands and wetland delineations and ensuring that that goes forward for review should any impacts be anticipated. Traffic impact studies is another big piece of this. So what are all those various intersections that might be impacted by this proposed development project and traffic coming in and out of that location? So all of those different studies, all of those different deeper dives really come in to inform this initial environmental review process. And then ultimately what you all will be deciding is are there enough impacts, significant impacts, that would then further warrant an environmental impact study, or do you have what you need to determine the mitigation in play, whether you're avoiding impacts, minimizing impacts, or actually mitigating for any potential impacts? Are those substantial enough that we don't need to do that deeper dive into an environmental impact statement? So again, regularly reference EAW and the guidelines that exist. And what we're looking at now, we're currently undergoing an internal review process, ensuring we're closely working with various consultants and looking at all of those studies, having the discussions and conversations with city staff to, again, really get a better image of what this looks like, be able to tell the story about this site in particular and what proposed development might look like down the road. So once we do that internal review, that document will come back in front of you all for approval to distribute. So at that point, once it's distributed out to the Environmental Quality Board, that goes out for a 30-day public review period. And that is a great opportunity for all of our public constituents, our agency stakeholders, to really provide that deeper dive or that review of what are they seeing from their perspectives and providing those comments back for initial review or additional review. So great opportunity. I've been hearing through the master planning process, a lot of public engagement has already happened and a lot of comments have come in. But what we want to make sure is that those comments also come in during that 30-day review period so that we are following the guidelines as they're laid out in the Minnesota rules. And for those of you interested, the Minnesota Rules 4410, that's where a lot of this environmental information comes into play. So I highly recommend anybody who wants more information can go reference those directly. It's a lot of legalese, so our city attorney probably loves it. However, there's also that Environmental Quality Board website that also has the practical guidance for citizens or the practical guidance for proposers or things like that. And that's really a wealth of information as well. So I'm sure you can't read this slide very well, but this is in the quick reference to an EAW, and what it does is just lay out the process. And where we currently are in the process is that internal review, the red box there, or the red highlighted box. So again, looking at that internal review, making sure we're doing our due diligence to look at all these various components that come into the environmental assessment worksheet, the EAW, and ensuring that we have all that information laid out. So again, next step, once the city determines that it is sufficient and complete, it will come and before you all for that continued distribution. We'll open that up for the 30-day public comment period. And then following that 30-day timeline, the city then has up to 30 days because it will come back in front of the city council to determine if an EIS is warranted or not. So that's what more or less is referred to then as the record of decision. So during that time frame, we will go through and ensure that any substantive comments that come in during the comment period are responded to and that those are documented and laid out in the findings of fact and continue the process moving forward. So really just wanted to provide an overview of what an EAW process looks like. Again, it's really looking at that comprehensive overview, comprehensive approach for all these different factors that come into play and making certain that we're doing our due diligence to not only your robust master planning process, but also the environmental side of it specifically. So with that, I'll probably turn it back over to Jennifer and keep on keeping on. Thanks.
So council, the next steps are to go to the Parks Commission. That would be on November 8th. The City Council, you would have the EAW for distribution at your next meeting on the 17th. The Planning Commission will also review the master plan on the 22nd. And based upon all of that feedback, we would bring it back to your table on December 1st. But before we go there, we know that you've heard a little bit of the comments from the public engagement. I know you guys thoroughly read your packet, so I'm confident you have read all of that literature and all of those comments. One thing that staff, as we've been reviewing it, is you see the area that's got this yellow around it that was the medium density. There's about 10 acres there of land, which could have been about 100 units with a medium density. One thing that staff would maybe recommend to the City Council is that you could maybe pull back and reduce that density to a low density land use instead of the medium density to really address what the residents have indicated is they don't want to see as many units there. This neighborhood is going to be unique, and I think that's what the council, you've been trying to create. So if we leave the medium density component here, you know, I could see it be a senior product, which, you know, for example, we've been really desiring more senior type products, you know, here in the community. You could have varying lot sizes that could provide different amenities and different options, really creating that sense of community to it. And so, council, at this time, staff is going to stand for questions and really seek your feedback of how you would like us to adjust this master plan before we go to the Parks Commission and the Planning Commission. And so we would stand for your questions, dialogue, and direction.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you, and thanks to everyone that presented. Very thorough and very good information to share with the council. So what I think I'll just do is I'll start with Councilmember Dennis, if you want to if you have some questions you would like to share or ask.
All right, well, thank you, Mayor. And just really a few points. And first and foremost, as Mayor Bailey said, thank you for that substantial report on this to get us up to where we are right now. As you've stated, we have been very transparent with this. The number of meetings and times in working with the public. I mean, this has been a big one, and I can't think of too many other projects that have involved this much connection and activity with all stakeholders. So thank you for that. So just a couple points that I would like to give, and I do this, and I'm going to be careful on how I state this because there is no forming of final opinions or final decisions here tonight. But just to bring up a few points that I think are of interest for all of us here and those watching at home. So the first one is that staff is right. The council has been very directed in working with you to seek the highest and best use for this space in a number of defined ways, including being able to enjoy this fantastic amenity that we have down there. It's not lip service. This is something that we're dedicated to and have been for a long time. And so when we continue to have feedback coming out from different places that indicate that we're not dedicated or we haven't been doing everything here to come out with the best final product, you know, that really isn't representative of the truth of all the hard work that's been going in. So that's number one. Second to that is, Mayor, I would have had the opportunity to preside over the ribbon cutting for Strawberry Fields when you were gone, but unfortunately we had a rain out that day. So there are a few things that are fresh in my mind, thanks to the work that I did with Mr. Doctor. Strawberry Fields Park represents the 34th park that we have in our city. Now, this is representative of a substantial dedication that we have to parkland and green spaces. I'm not a planner, but I've been around this now for a while, and I know that there are formulas and charts that planners use when it comes to looking at understanding where we fit into the matrix with other communities of a similar size across America. And folks, we are really off the charts. We have far more dedicated spaces than most communities have. And so again, this is a dedicated commitment from our staff team, our council, all the volunteers we have on the various commissions that help to form this and provide support. So this is something that I think is very important for the community to know and understand, that there's a dedication that really is already built into this. Next, I want to mention that when we do these spaces, and Zach and his team have done incredible work making sure that the enhancements and the plantings that we do are they're natural relative to the indigenous area in which we live. So restoring prairies, making sure that we have pollinator-friendly plants, plants that help reduce runoff and help to provide cleansing. This is a very intrinsic process, and our folks do a really, really good job with that. So when you walk through these areas, you know, pay attention, look around a little bit and see some of these features, because they're really important and they're all designed and built in so that we have the very best opportunity that we can provide here for our community. And then last but not least, I want to just touch on the park dedication amount. And I know that we've got our ordinance that deals with a certain percentage of land that can be given. But I do want to say, and I think we have to be fair and we've got to be objective here, we are really very lucky that the owner of this property has been working with us. He didn't have to. And he's giving us access and opportunity of more space than what we would have had. And so when you look at that and you think about that as the last piece of this, really there's a lot of great work going on and there's a lot of good things coming out of it. So I feel very good up to this moment and confident that the project, that whatever it ends up being in the end, it will be the very best that we could make out of that situation. So thank you, and thank you, Mayor.
All right. Councilmember Thede, did you have any comments or questions?
I think it just, I think from the standpoint of where we started and and where we are, I think we've done some, you know, significant looking at different possibilities and, you know, really, in my opinion, listening to people, you know, from the standpoint of definitely getting more of the access to the water. And in fact, that whole, we've got the water access for that whole piece of property, and making it a park. I think that the area that you have around in the yellow, I think we've always talked about that being more of the single family, you know, so I would kind of agree with that. And then some of that land where Doc was going to put his you know, big concert venue and so forth up there on a hill on the other side of the tracks, that we've, you know, discussed maybe a little bit of higher density or something up there, closer to the tracks and so forth. So because it does, you know, I guess people that buy $1.5 million and $2 million homes don't like to have railroad tracks and trains in their backyard, I suppose. But so I think actually it's you know, a great job has been done, and you know, I think you know, just thanks that we've gone through the process to really take a close look at it. So tell me, I know at one point the Pulte was looking at those lot widths being, you know, 60 and then some 50. Is that what this represents? I was trying to recall whether the lot widths primarily in this design were what they were, 60 or?
Well, Mayor, members of the council, that's actually a really good point, because this is our master plan. It's just showing that it can lay out, and so we're showing kind of a generic lot size. Pulte is in the room this evening, and I can see he's been feverishly taking notes as you've been talking. We anticipate they would be making a preliminary plat application. I would speculate that they will probably look at a variety of lot sizes as they've looked at the site. So I would anticipate you'd probably learn more about that when they make a preliminary plat application.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
No
Thanks.
other questions at the moment? Councilmember Olson?
Thank you, Mayor. Jennifer and staff, thank you for a very well put together, instructive packet of information, not just for us, but for the public as well. You know, clearly this process is on track and on the timeline that we talked about far earlier in the year. I remember sitting in front of the Planning Commission with Zach back in February or March, and we talked about this exact timeline and that we would be, you know, kind of in this finalization and potential decision-making place towards the end of the year. And so it seems like the work has gone on according to plan, and I did have a couple of questions based on some of the information presented tonight. First and foremost, I'm glad you mentioned that this is our master plan. We are the ones who are master planning, and you know, the intent of that master plan is to provide guidance to the property owner and or developer with respect to what is the city desire. Is that accurate?
Mayor, members of the council, that is exactly correct, because that we're showing the intent, but clearly there's not a lot of detail. You don't see lot dimensions on this, and you don't see lot depths, and you don't see housing pads. You would see that at a preliminary plat time.
And the reason I bring it up is because through the course of this process, we've had several people indicate, well, you know, this is what the plan says. We're master planning. We're not accepting any applications for the property to develop at this point. So folks need to understand the difference between the two. And I think you did a nice job of delineating that. The second thing is, with regard to the EAW, I want to go back to something that our consultant from Bolton and Mank said, which is part of the process with regard to the EAW is to talk about the various species of wildlife that are there. And that's important to talk about because, again, as we've worked through this process, several people have brought up, you know, this is a area where, you know, endangered species may live, or it is an area that is best suited for bird watching or whatever the case might be. And I want to be clear, and this is why I'm going to ask this question, when we get that EAW report, which you outlined in your timeline, it will identify if there are indeed any endangered species that need to be protected on that site. Is that accurate?
Mayor, members of the council, yes, it would outline if they've been identified or if the habitat is suitable for them. And then other agencies that may have more in-depth knowledge or resources that would identify that, they would come forth during that comment period, and then we would need to address that.
Okay. And depending on what we see, we may need to move into a deeper dive with an environmental impact study, or we may not. Wasn't EAW done when the site was mass site graded for the golf course in the 90s? I suspect it was.
Actually, to my recollection, with the conditional use permit, I don't believe that there's an EAW that was required.
Okay.
Because there are certain thresholds that were not tripped.
Okay.
To require that. So to my recollection, there was not an environmental
Then
study.
this EAW will be the first one in a while, and clearly it's going to carry a lot of weight. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Now, in your comments, you mentioned that the river doesn't have navigational ability. Would you please expand on that and let the public know exactly what you mean when you use that phrase, please?
Well, it's interesting because when we look at the Mississippi River, the actual navigational channel is actually out here on this outer edge, and that's the channel that the Corps maintains. So you see a lot of dredging activities, and that's for obviously shipment along the river. Aggregate Industries does maintain a channel up into their facility or port in this location, and so they maintain that as a navigational channel as well. So boats of significant size are able to navigate into that area. But unfortunately, you can even actually see where in this aerial photo where you have some of that sediment deposited here along that backwater area. This area here is got 6 feet of water at best at times, and then it obviously, if I were to have showed you some additional aerial photos, you actually probably would have seen this as farmland, because if you look at the plat, people own out into the river, because until the dam was put in, it was a field and different things like that, and so that's why you have all those remnant stumps back there. So I've spent a lot of time kayaking back in this backwater, and so I'm really familiar with that. So yes, this area, you really can't get a boat up there very safely, or you guess you're going to just risk losing your prop along the way. So that's kind of my background on that.
Thank you, and I'm glad you brought up that the property owners have property lines that extend out into the water. That really was kind of what I was shooting for in asking that question, because that channel does have significant challenges with respect to any sort of access, the stumps and the growth and all those sorts of things underneath. And I know when we walked the property, one of the times we walked it, one of the things we talked about was, well, what kind of watercraft could you actually get in there? And it's going to be fairly limited. And Zach talked about a water trail. And I think if you try to tie that information into your comments about the regional park that is ultimately going to happen out in this area, that's when we're going to see the ability to actually put watercraft into the water and have people enjoy that to a much wider and more robust level. Is that accurate?
Mayor, members of the council, that would be exactly correct, because right now pretty much the only people that are using the backwater are duck hunters and kayaks and canoes at this time.
Right. And not that we don't want the duck hunters and the kayakers and the canoers to have a ball, that we do, but this isn't going to be the panacea for river access that maybe we would hope it would be, but it's not too far away once we are able to create that regional park on the island. And then the last thing is, Zach, I believe you mentioned that through the course of the planning process, the council expressed a desire to have greater parkland dedication than the ordinance allows. And so where we're at today, based on this rendering, is 33 acres of riverfront and 12 acres additional to the scientific and natural area, for a total of an additional 45 acres of open space. Is that accurate?
That's correct, and I should probably add as well, I don't think these slides show it, but I believe there's another 7 to 8 acres of open space that you see along the railroad side of the property. As development occurs, we pick up open space for ponds and trails too, so there's actually another 7 to 8 acres probably of that type of space.
Okay, but that would not be tied to the 33 acres along the riverfront. So if the council wanted to take that 33 and try to make it 40, is that a possibility? Is that a challenge based on the topography, based on the land connectivity, et cetera? What are your thoughts on that?
It's more about the land you want. The number doesn't mean as much as the land and what you're going to do with it. So what we've got with the 33 acres, we believe we've protected, some significant tree stands, prairie, wetlands, river frontage, and it's given us some flat land to be able to do active recreational areas. So if the council has a desire for some other piece of the property that there's a use for, that the council sees a significant use for, then we would look at that. But I don't look at park properties, acreage of park properties based on just a number. I look at it more as a, what are you gonna do with it and how are you gonna use it?
So then if that's the case, are you confident that the 33 that you have designated currently, in addition to what I believe you have outlined in the red there, which is 12 SNA, is that right?
Correct.
Are you confident that that's going to give us the sorts of amenities that we want out of this park in this space, which would then ultimately, in the long run, complement the regional park that will come online in the future?
Yeah, and I probably didn't say it well enough at the beginning, but when I mentioned the community park, that does come with the typical size. I mean, it can be anywhere from 40 to 60. We even have one that's 80 acres, I believe. So if you add the 40 acres, and I know the SNA site is not officially city property, but the connection and that experience, that recreational experience connection, this is a large park, and if you actually connect all those pieces, this will be the second largest park in Cottage Grove, contiguous park. Part of it's state, part of it's city, but this definitely meets community park criteria. And when we talk community park, that's a mile service radius. But of course, with the river access, this is a very unique park. It'll draw much further than that 1 mile service radius. It'll draw the entire community and visitors beyond the community.
And is it your opinion, as somebody who does this for a living, that the space that would be dedicated to green space and park would be adequate to serve the potential visitor load, so to speak?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, great. Well, I really look forward to seeing the EAW. I think that document is going to be incredibly instructive. And I'm sure that, it will be 100% objective and give us all the information we need to determine what our next step are environmentally. And at this stage of the planning process, keeping in mind that we don't have an application in front of us at this point, it feels like the team has really taken all of the feedback that's been given through the various channels of social media, et cetera, the open houses, and tried to react in an appropriate way. And I'll tell you what, again, having walked down there, that SNA, that very natural space, growing by 12 additional acres and then being directly adjacent to the 33 acres that are currently planned for Riverfront Park, that's going to be a huge chunk of land that people can spend time on. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for recreational activities year-round as a result. So at this stage, I think we're moving in the right direction. I'm grateful for all the hard work and effort, and thank you for the presentation.
All right. Just a few comments and maybe a couple questions. And again, I appreciate the fact that Pulte's in the room to gather input and such with us. So first of all, again, staff and all of our consultants and everybody, thank you for putting all this information together. First thing I'll say is I agree, the area in yellow, would like to see that be single-family houses versus medium density. The other thing is that other medium density that you're proposing down there, I know one of the things that we have been talking about, I'm not sure if Pulte was part of that specific discussion, but I like the idea of these. We've had, I think, two different companies, maybe Pulte's one of them, that have come before us and talked about the co-op. And so if there's an opportunity, we haven't had that opportunity or that type of life cycle housing in Cottage Grove yet. So that is something that would be of interest to me, especially if that is something that they're kind of looking up on that far upper corner there in the higher density. So that's one. The other item, a couple items I just want to mention both for the public and then one request, I guess, of staff and the developer. One is, and some of the council members here have brought a few of these, I'll call it general items up as it relates to, things that are being set out in the public. And I think what frustrates us, and I think I heard that from my colleague here, Councilmember Dennis, is when we hear things that we know, I'll say, are factually untrue. And, as an example, and it's, whether it's intended or unintentional, there's been a lot of feedback, a lot of us have received, for example, from people that said the Friends of the Mississippi have a lot of money, or they've got money to provide to this, product. I am aware, and I think the rest of the council received the email from the state of Minnesota just this last week that said that is not the case. That is not the case, period. End of story, it's not the case. And so the reason I want to bring that up is because we keep hearing that. We keep verifying it, and the verification is not accurate. Now, you actually, Jennifer, maybe went a little bit softer on the time frame. That I think you said 2 to 5 years, and I believe in the info that we received is 3 to 5 years at the earliest, was stated to us before there would even be a process to go after that money. And I concur, and I don't know the rest of the council does too, I do concur with your assessment that, in my opinion, working with the county on a more of a regional park, purchase of land and options out on the island, with the vision that we've had, the Met Council has had, the state of Minnesota has had for many, many years, well before any of us have been on this council, and maybe even well before all of us were born, I don't know. The fact of the matter is, I concur with that idea and would definitely want to work to see what we can do with that. A couple other items too is the roadway, and I thought it was interesting because I do see on the concept plan here, you've got kind of the, what I'll consider the realigned county road, which is 103rd Street, up on kind of that upper corner there. Just for the public to be aware, and again, you did an amazing job of kind of laying everything out in the future. So when we went through the study and reviewing the study with the county, just so the general public is aware, originally, the other option was to take it where she's going with the cursor. The road was going to literally cut straight across the current or the former Mississippi Dunes Golf Course with a road and a bridge. And the county agreed, the county worked with us, agreed that we did not believe that that was the best use and opportunity for that particular property. And so, yeah, you can see kind of the look there. So that is why when you see the two different arrows, there was, in essence, there might have actually been a third one, but I do know those were the two kind of the main ones that they were talking about. But we said that we did not want to cut through this area because, one, we wanted river access. We wanted to maintain as much as we can the current area along the river, and if the road is going to go in, we would prefer it go kind of where the road is now with some enhancements. So I wanted to mention that.
I think the word you're looking for, Mayor, is bifurcate. Would that be?
Oh my goodness, I'm not saying that word.
I mean, with Jennifer up at the podium, I want to make sure we speak her language.
So, and then I also wanted just to share that, you know, and again, always like to try to get the facts out. You know, just, I think it was even just earlier today, there was a message out on Facebook. It was kind of talking about the community center and the process of the community center, and there was somebody that was suggesting that we spend $2 million and buy this property and create a park. Well, I did ask staff just to, I'll say humor me and tell me what would be the price, and nothing against Pulte. But that number is more like $8+ million. And so just to put it out there, and that does not include maintaining the property, which leads me to my other comment before my only my only request, and that is, you know, Zach, you and your team have done an amazing job maintaining our parks as best that you can. And matter of fact, we just came through a budget process where I believe Councilmember Dennis specifically mentioned, you know, he was concerned that for as many years as we have went forward here, that we have not added any park, and when I say park staff, I'm talking park, like people that are gonna mow and do all the maintenance and all that kind of stuff. So we've been doing it with kind of our existing staff, and you heard, I think Councilmember Dennis, you said, how many more parks, 35?
We've got 34.
34?
And so we have not, if you think about this, if you had a staff team of, say, 5 people, okay? And if you go back 20 years, and 20 years ago, we had 20 parks, okay? Now, we've added 14 to this, but we've never added one additional individual to help maintain this. We just squeeze people a little harder. and then certain things fall behind. And we want to keep the quality and the service level high because that's what people come to expect from us. It's part of keeping the promise. So that's...
Well, and thank you. And the reason I bring it up is just whether it's the community center, whether it's whatever we do from a budgetary standpoint, we as a council and our staff do everything we can to squeeze every penny out of a dollar that we possibly can. And so, you know, kudos to our staff for doing what they've been doing with the tools and things that we're doing. The reason I bring that up is because other than the addition of parks and that is something we're going to have to, I know you had brought that up, that we're going to bring up and discuss at this next year's budgetary meeting for 2023, actually. But there's a whole nother factor if you were to literally say, hey, we're going to make this entire thing a park. You know, there's more to it than that. And our friends from the Friends of the Mississippi, I had the opportunity to go travel up in to the one in Elk River that they did, and even their own staff was telling us about how many up to $1 million plus that they're spending to maintain that land that they have up in Elk River. So it isn't even, you know, people challenged us on what we were saying we're going to spend on a community center. We're talking about significantly more money, to be honest with you, than just to say that we were going to do this. Yeah, Councilmember Wilson?
Isn't it true, and Zach will correct me here if I'm wrong, but isn't it true that when you look at our city, Councilmember Dennis mentioned the number of parks, we're in the neighborhood of 10% plus of our total developed land is park and green space as a community. Is that right?
All right, so I'll pause before they try to talk about this, because ironically, before the council meeting, I literally asked our administrator that question. I said, I'd really like to know, do you want to comment?
Well, Mayor and members of the council, I have one rule that I've always used in 17 years, and that rule I'm going to hold true tonight is I don't do math on camera. Okay. And so if you would give us the opportunity to calculate the acreage, break it down on a per resident basis, then we could have that comparison, because I think that's what you're getting at. Correct. Is that exact number is greater than most communities with how much open space we have. So if you'll let us go back and do math off camera, then we can get you that number.
Perfect.
Thank you.
And the reason I bring that up, just so I can say it right off the bat, is, you know, I do hear, and I know I've rest of the council hear from a lot of people that, you know, more park space, which is great, right? And I agree, more open space, so things that we can do to manage that piece of it. But with that comes a cost, and to be frank with you, and I acknowledged this, I believe, yesterday, the city can't buy every piece of land. There are certain areas within our community that we've looked at distinctively, including another park that isn't even on this 34, 35. There's another one coming up. I used the one off of 65th in that new development up there, that gorgeous wooded area. So I just want the public to be aware that we do have a master plan of our entire community, and we do look at where these parks need to be located or should be located, or amenities within a piece of property that are important. Like you talked about the tree stands and things that are in there. We definitely wanted it literally from day one. And I don't know if it was Pulte, but I remember and Jennifer, you didn't Administrator Levitt, you didn't even mention this. But I think the very first concept, if you will, not from us, but from one of the developers, was a very, very dense piece of property on the dunes. Like, it almost took everything. And I don't mean to put that out on you guys, and the first thing this entire council said, no way, no way. That's not, we're willing to work with you, but, you know, we need river access, and frankly, Pulte and the landowner is willing to do that. So I think I'll get off my soapbox now, but the only other suggestion I would like to make, and I'll pose this to staff, but also to Pulte. There is, in my opinion, I don't know what your plans are specific, because we haven't seen them yet, but this area that's kind of up in the upper area, and Jennifer's using her cursor right in there that you're seeing, I really would like to see that area be, I'd almost want to say, more unique. And what I mean by unique is almost like custom builders. We've had, you know, and when I say customer builders, whether it's you guys building it or whatever, my point is, that is so, that area to me is so different than the area in the, I'll call it the core of this property. And we've had, you know, I don't know if is Mike Riggs still doing custom? He retired, okay. We had a gentleman that used to do custom homes here in Cottage Grove, Mike Rigg. And he, matter of fact, Hidden Valley, where Councilmember Thede lives. And it was nice to see something different. So I'd like to see if we can up in that area, because that is probably going to be the main, you know, if everything goes through as we're kind of looking here and all that, and we're going to have this nice park amenity there, the majority of the people, I believe, are going to come through that neighborhood. And they're going to get down to that park, whether it's with boats and things like that. I would really like to see something a little bit more unique, maybe larger lot sizes or whatever in that particular area, because I also believe it'll complement, in my opinion, it'll complement some of the other landowners that are up there that have more rural estate homes kind of thing. So that was my, out of all the things that have been discussed, that was the only one that I would just like to throw out there as something to take a look at. But I like what staff has done. I've had the opportunity a couple times now to walk the property with a couple different of the groups and to see the opportunities for this park and the open space along the river there, and is absolutely amazing and it's breathtaking. And I look forward to, you know, seeing what we can provide for the citizens of Cottage Grove from an access standpoint. So, okay. Council, any other comments or suggestions for staff? Staff, do you need anything else from us at this
Mayor
point?
and Council, we just thank you for your time this evening and for your feedback. We will continue to refine these designs as they come back to you. And obviously, you know the schedule that's before you, and we'll be maintaining that going forward. So thank you.
Okay.